Volcanoes are among the most awe-inspiring natural phenomena on our planet. They can create entire islands and reshape landscapes, but they're also incredibly dangerous, causing some of the deadliest disasters in human history. And we've got 3 of them right here in the Pacific Northwest. Now I live just about an hour away from 2 of them. So naturally I get asked this question all the time. Are we due for a massive volcanic eruption? The short answer is no. But there's a lot more to the story. So let's talk about it. First, we need to talk about what makes a volcano a volcano. A volcano happens when hot molten rock called magma gets released from deep within the earth. Now, when people think of volcanoes, they picture this sloopy lava oozing down a mountainside. And while that does happen sometimes, it's not the only type of eruption. Some volcanoes erupt explosively, sending ash and rock high into the air, which can have devastating consequences. For example, the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens in Washington state was one of the deadliest and most economically damaging natural disasters in U.S. history. On the other hand, the 2018 eruption of Mount Kilauea in Hawaii was a relatively minor affair compared to some of its predecessors. But it did produce spectacular lava fountains that reached heights of over 200 feet. Now, if you're feeling super nerdy today, you might be asking yourself, wait a minute, what's the difference between lava and magma? Well, good news. I have the answer for you. Lava refers to molten rock that has erupted onto the Earth's surface, whereas magma refers to molten rock that is still beneath the surface. Okay, now that we've got that out of the way, let's talk about the 3 volcanoes that could potentially erupt at any moment and wipe out everything around them. Just kidding. Don't worry, the chances of this happening are incredibly low. We're going to cover the likelihood of an eruption, how each volcano would impact the surrounding area, and what we can do to prepare ourselves. The first volcano we need to discuss is Mount Hood. Mount Hood is an active stratovolcano in Oregon, about 50 miles south of Portland. According to the United States Geological Survey, Mount Hood has had at least 40,000 years of activity, though its most recent major eruption was about 1,500 years ago. It is the second highest peak in Oregon at 11,239 feet. As far as its risk level, Mount Hood sits at a 2 out of 4 on the Volcanic Threat Assessment score, which takes into account things like population density, how close cities are to the volcano, and historical eruption frequency. On a scale of 1 to 4, 4 being the worst, a score of 2 means that while there is a moderate level of volcanic threat, the likelihood of an eruption occurring in any given year is extremely low. But even if it were to erupt tomorrow, the chances of significant damage or loss of life are low. While Mount Hood is the most active of the 3 volcanoes I'll be discussing today, it's also the least likely to cause widespread damage. That's because it is mostly a lava dome volcano, meaning that its eruptions tend to consist of slow-moving lava flows rather than explosive blasts. While lava flows can certainly cause damage, they are generally much less destructive than explosive eruptions. If Mount Hood were to erupt explosively, it could send ash and debris as far away as Portland. And if a large enough eruption were to occur, it could also affect parts of central and eastern Oregon. However, the likelihood of such an event occurring are so remote that it is not considered a major concern. You see, Mount Hood is a highly viscous lava dome-type volcano. In other words, its magma is thick and sticky, which makes it difficult for gases to escape. When gases become trapped in the magma, pressure builds up until the volcano erupts explosively. However, the thick magma also prevents the gases from traveling very far, resulting in a shorter and wider ash cloud. If the eruption were mild, the ash cloud would only travel a few miles. If it were severe, it could travel up to 100 miles. However, again, the likelihood of either of these scenarios occurring is incredibly small. So what about the other 2 volcanoes? Let's start with Mount Shasta. Mount Shasta is an active stratovolcano in California. It stands 14,179 feet tall and is the second highest point in California. As far as its risk level, Mount Shasta has a 3 out of 4 rating on the Volcanic Threat Assessment score. This is mainly because of its proximity to major population centers. For example, if there were a major eruption tomorrow, ash could reach Sacramento, which has a population of over 2 million people. While Mount Shasta is a potentially dangerous volcano, it's important to note that it hasn't erupted in nearly 400 years. In fact, its most recent activity was a small lava flow in the 1780s. Because of this, many people consider it to be dormant rather than active. However, geologists disagree, pointing out that its history shows that it could blow again at any moment. If Mount Shasta were to erupt tomorrow, it would be catastrophic. Its slopes are so steep that its pyroclastic flows would travel rapidly downhill, incinerating everything in their path. And if it were a large enough eruption, ash and debris would blanket much of northern California and even parts of Oregon and Nevada. Fortunately, the likelihood of this happening any time soon is incredibly low. And that brings us to the final volcano in our discussion, Mount Rainier. Mount Rainier is an active stratovolcano in Washington state, about 80 miles southeast of Seattle. It stands 14,411 feet tall and is the highest peak in the Cascade Range. Its most recent major eruption occurred in the 1400s, but before that, it erupted sometime around the year 1000, maybe a little after. Maybe it was the year 1006. We're not exactly sure because there weren't really written records back then, but it was around that time. That eruption deposited 2.5 cubic miles of material at its base, which was 4 times the volume of the 1980 Mount St. Helens eruption. And that was a big deal. As far as its risk level, Mount Rainier is a 4 out of 4 on the Volcanic Threat Assessment scale, the highest possible rating. This is due to several factors, including its proximity to Seattle, which has a population of about 4 million people, as well as the volcano's history of extremely dangerous eruptions. Mount Rainier is considered to be one of the most dangerous volcanoes in the United States. If it were to erupt explosively, it could send ash and debris as far away as Seattle and Portland, and its pyroclastic flows could cause extensive damage in the surrounding area. Fortunately, the likelihood of this happening anytime soon is incredibly low. In fact, the U.S. Geological Survey estimates that the probability of a major eruption in the next 30 years is about 1 in 14,000. However, because the potential consequences are so severe, it is still considered to be a major concern. I hope you enjoyed learning a bit more about the volcanoes in our area. Remember, the odds of a massive volcanic eruption happening anytime soon are incredibly low. However, it is always important to be prepared for natural disasters. In addition to following the advice of local officials, there are several things you can do to better prepare yourself and your family. These include having a plan in place for where you will go and what you will do in the event of an eruption, as well as stocking up on food, water, and other supplies that you will need in order to survive without assistance for at least 3 days. It's also worth mentioning that there are actually a lot more volcanoes in our area than just the 3 we discussed today. In fact, there are about a dozen or so volcanoes in the Cascade Volcanic Arc, which stretches from southern British Columbia all the way down to northern California. Most of these volcanoes are dormant, but that doesn't mean that they won't become active again someday. One of the most interesting and potentially dangerous volcanoes in the Arc is Mount St. Helens, which you may have heard of because it had the most violent eruption in U.S. history in 1980. Since then, it has been relatively quiet, but it is still considered to be active. And who knows, maybe one day it will erupt again. In the meantime, we can all rest easy, knowing that the odds of a massive volcanic eruption are incredibly low. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.